My mother was raised on a ranch in North Dakota, and so they were mainline Protestants in a sense. They were on the main circuit line, whatever Protestant preacher came through.
Which probably was every month, or, I mean, it wasn't all that often.
It wasn't all that often, and when they came through, then they would notify all the neighbors, and they'd go to the schoolhouse, and they'd have a service. So I don't think my mother ever thought of herself as anything but Protestant, because the person coming through wasn't really coming through as a Presbyterian or a Baptist or a Methodist. They were coming through as the pastor of the Protestant side, because there were Catholics in the neighborhood too.
But they didn't?
They didn't share services. And then my dad's roots lay in the South, and his mom was very active in the church, Baptist, Pentecostal. She ran a home for unwed mothers, and she worked to feed the poor and the hungry, and worked at a thrift shop that my dad's cousin had for her Skid Row mission. They were very involved people. But when I was 2, my mom died, and my dad did not go to church after that. I don't know when he had stopped. I was 2, so I don't know when he had stopped. But he always sent me to whatever mainline Protestant church was handy. So we lived one place, and the corner had a Methodist church. We lived another, and walking distance for a little girl, there was a Baptist church. So I went to, they were not just independent little storefront churches, they were mainline, but they were always Protestant. My dad had a great heart for the poor, and maybe he got that from his mother, I don't know, but he had heard that the Catholic Church oppressed the poor. So I was forbidden to ever go into a Catholic church. That was the only real directive that he ever gave me. If I wanted to go to the Presbyterians or to the Lutherans or wherever I wanted to go, it was okay with him. But I knew I wasn't to go in a Catholic church. Today, I can say, well, he was totally misinformed. Because the Catholic Church all over the world is the great friend of the poor, and they don't have to be Catholic either. Right. But anyway, that's what he thought. And so I think the first thing that happened in my journey with Christ was that probably one of my grandmothers, my Swedish grandmother, my mother's mother, was a very prayerful woman. And people have called her a saint, even though in my family they don't use words like that, being Protestants. But I think one of the 2 grandmas probably gave me some books that were Bible story books. And I learned to love Jesus very early. I know that when I was 5, I wrote a hymn. But I wasn't a pious little kid at all. I was a sock that other kid in the stomach, sort of a little tomboy. But I did love Jesus. And I think because of my mother's death and the moves around, and then my dad remarried eventually, and my poor stepmother had mental problems. So I had a need for God from a very early age. And so I was interested in churches, and nobody made me go to church. I wanted to go to church. But I, of course, never went to a Catholic church. But one day, I found myself in the parked car. My stepmom had gone into a doctor, and I was waiting in the car, and across the street was the Forbidden Catholic Church. And the door was wide open. In those days, church doors at Catholic churches were open so that people could come in and pray. Well, I'm sure you'll understand this. My dad wasn't there, but he was there because I wasn't about to do anything that he said not to do, because you just didn't.
Imprint
yeah.
of his views on conscience.
If you valued your life, you did not cross my father.
That's a real strong imprint, yes, okay.
So, but I got this bright idea. He hadn't said that I couldn't look into a Catholic church. So I went across the street, and I went to the door, and I carefully stood on the sill, and I looked into the church. And then something happened, Marcus. It was just a church, you know, center aisle down to the front and pews on either side. But a presence came, and it came out to meet me, and it was warm, it was sweet, it was living. And of course I didn't know anything about the tabernacle. I was looking straight down the aisle, so I was looking at the tabernacle.
And that would have been when approximately that would have been before the major changes in the...
Oh yes,
yeah.
I can't remember how old I was exactly. I think I was somewhere maybe 11, 12, right. No older than 13, no younger than 10. And I had really lost my memory. My dad and I had moved so many times, and I think I'd been traumatized with so many different caregivers. So I can't remember a lot about my childhood, but somehow I never forgot that. It was an experience that has stayed with me my entire life, even though it took me many years to know that was Jesus in the Eucharist who was reaching out to me with his love.
You would have had
his love.
You would have had no data to even put
No, I never heard of communion or Eucharist or tabernacle, and I don't consciously remember looking at the tabernacle. This was coming. It came to the door, and it enveloped me. But I know now where it was coming from. But of course, it was years before I knew what was actually going on. So then the next thing that was important in my journey home to the Mother Church.
A member of the Catholic Church, how did you get over your father's voice, quote, in your conscience that had always told you to not even enter a Catholic church? Was it difficult overcoming prejudices from your family and friends who were Protestant? How did you deal with it? Thank you, Alec.
Thank you for asking. It wasn't difficult because I knew that my dad was wrong. I knew very early on from my experiences with the church, with the hospitals and the receiving patients who had no money, and the missionaries helping people, and I saw that the church did help the poor, and I thought, well, dear Daddy was just a victim of his Southern prejudices, and that he would have loved the church because he loved everything that was reasonable and that was good. The second part of the question, refresh me. What was the second thing that I was being asked? Oh, about whether it was hard. It was hard on my pride when my intelligent friends from college, we had all been quite intellectual, and we thought we were pretty hot stuff with our grades and our honors and everything, and to have them, kindly dismiss me as, well, she's just eccentric. that was a little hard on the pride, and I'm sure it was very good for me.
Well, in our work with the Coming Home Network International, we've worked with all kinds of people on the journey, and we've put together a list of barriers that keep people from the church. We've got, I think we're up to 16 major things, but the top 3 are always about the same: ignorance, prejudice, and bad Catholics, for want of a better phrase. In other words, ignorance, they just don't know the truth. Number 2, what they think they know isn't true. And then sometimes the examples, the models they had. I mean, in many ways, that explains your own experience as a young person. Didn't have the knowledge of the church, and what you were told wasn't true.
Yes.
And I don't know how many Catholics you really knew.
Well, God was so kind to me because I knew wonderful people who were Catholics.
Okay, great.
I sort of think of myself as a little
Excellent.
pagan baby out in the mission fields, and this wonderful missionary comes in and he feeds you and he clothes you and he answers all your questions about God and he leads you to Jesus. Well, that's what wonderful. The counselor at my high school was Catholic, and then Brother Richard, and
Especially Brother Richard, yeah.
the woman who became my godmother, who Brother Richard introduced me to.
So I'm thinking that in your example, for especially our Catholic audience, I mean, even given an ignorance of what the church really taught, and then prejudice, that it was the witness of just a regular old Catholic that loved to live their faith that really opened the door for you for such a long
Exactly.
time.
And also God gave me the grace that even when I was very young, I realized that when people said things about groups, I realized that was silly.
Yeah.
That's a grace.
Although by God's grace you made it through the intellectual environment of the universities too. Sometimes those can be the most devastating places in our country when it comes to the Catholic faith particularly.
Yes, but fortunately Brother Richard was writing me
There you
almost
go.
every day.
What a gift from God.
What a gift indeed.
Is he still here? Is he with the Lord?
No, he died when I had only been in the church a few years.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Raised Catholic, but have been bouncing around in different Protestant churches for almost 30 years. I'm trying to return to the Catholic Church, but feel like I am doing wrong because of some of the teachings I received that are against the church. Did you have a problem with this, and how would you overcome the guilt feelings? It was a little bit like the last question, but...
Yes. You know, one thing that helped me was to think about the churches. All these different churches all have some of the truth, or most anyway. But then, you know, okay, this one started in 1800, this one started in 1600. Now here's the church that Jesus started right at the time that he said, here's Peter, and he promised that he would not let this church be destroyed. So it helped me a great deal to think I'm going back to the real roots. Everybody who starts a new church wants to go back to the roots, but these are the real roots that Jesus put in place. And so that's been very helpful to me, and maybe it will be helpful to you in recognizing that there's thousands of people out there who think that they finally have got it right, but
you know, in this...
that isn't necessarily true.
This question from this gentleman is a really good one because, again, in our work, we deal with people that talk about this a lot. Our consciences are formed, not overnight, right? That's
right.
all of our life. And some of those things that we've accepted without question make a deep impact in our conscience. Sometimes we end up doing things that are sinful that we didn't know were sinful because of the way we were taught.
Yes.
The way we were shaped against what God wanted us to do as he formed our conscience, and same thing with things that we learned. And sometimes in the same way that it took many years to form these false ideas, it may take a while
Yes.
to work through those voices.
And I think we have to keep praying and asking God for help. When I was a tiny child, from whatever source, my picture of God was he sat on a throne, had a beard, he scowled, and he wrote down in a book everything that Treece did that was bad. And I never thought of him ever being pleased. And I had to overcome that. That took a long time. I think that's one reason God sent John XXIII into my life, because I could see the love of God in him. So yes, I know we do get these ideas, and we can feel guilty for no reason, no reasonable reason, and then we just have to keep praying for healing.
Yeah, I love that prayer, and that's in Scripture where the Father says, I believe, help my unbelief.
Yes.
And so the gentleman that sent us the email, I'm going to ask everyone to be praying for him on his journey to help him deal with truth, to be open to truth, and to heal some of those things that he's learned that aren't true, to be open to the fullness of the church. We've got another caller. David, you encountered the beauty of the Catholic Church. What would you like to say to them to encourage them to make the journey?
I would like to say that if you want to have truth in its fullness, if you want to have beauty, everlasting and ever new, if you want to have love in the communion of saints, where all of us, Protestants and Catholics, all of those who don't opt out or join together, if you want to have wonderful opportunities to worship the Lord and to receive him into your own being, then you want to become a Catholic. You will be so happy. It is, for me, the greatest thing in my life.
You've been a Catholic how many years? Approximately.
I've been a Catholic 50 years or 45 or I'm terrible at numbers. This is why I
my only
write
point
books.
saying is you've seen the good and the bad of it over the last 50 years.
I have,
But you
yes.
haven't for a second lost your love for the beauty of this church.
Oh, never.
All right. Well, Patricia, thank you very much
Thank
for
you,
joining
Marcus,
us on the
for
journey
having
home.
me.
And thank you for using your gift for writing. Meet John XXIII and your book on Padre Pio and your other books on the saints. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for joining us on this program. I pray that Patricia's witness has been encouragement to your walk of faith. God bless you.